Let's dive into this history. Shadow over the trees. R.A.F. Waddington, England, March 17, 1944. The wind came in hard from the north, cold enough to bite through the seams of the flight suits. The concrete of the runway gleamed slick under the dim amber floodlights, and the great black hulks of the bombers loomed like sleeping giants, waiting to wake. No one spoke much. Voices didn't carry far here anyway, not over the hum of ground crews, the clank of metal, the distant cough of coughing engines. Inside Hangar 3, under the weak yellow glow of overhead bulbs, the crew of Lancaster K. King prepared in silence. It was their 6th mission. No one said it, but everyone knew the math. 20 missions and you were rotated out. The trick was surviving that long. Captain Garrett Wood stood apart from the others, tall and thin, his face lined with age beyond his 32 years. A silver streak cut through the black at his temples. He checked the mission maps one last time, fingers tracing the red X over the RUR. Steelworks. High priority. High risk. Sergeant Robbie Hales, his flight engineer, rolled his eyes as he folded his final letter to his sister back in Devon. He always wrote one, a ritual. Today's read only. Clear skies or not, I'll find a way back. Love, Rob. His hands trembled slightly as he sealed it, but no one noticed. They were all trembling. Fuel-topped, Robbie said finally, just to break the silence. Birds angry tonight. Kicked like hell when I checked the oil pump. Garrett offered him a nod, then turned toward the waiting bomber. The engines were already warming, grumbling like beasts behind steel ribs. He climbed up the ladder with a weight that had nothing to do with gear. At 22:12, K. King taxied out onto the runway. The 4th in the line. 5th wave. Final say. Target Zone 12. RUR Sector. Steelworks Facility, Code Point Echo 5. Expected contact at 23:30. They lifted into the air with a roar, their wheels pulling away from the earth like a farewell handshake. Beneath them, England faded into fog and shadow. The sky above was pure black. The moon hung behind cloud veils, casting barely a hint of silver. Radio chatter crackled. Fox 5, turbulence port side. Alpha 2, flak bursts at 10 o'clock low. They were close. Then the sky tore. A white flash. A brutal sound. A jolt so deep it felt like the plane itself screamed. Garrett grabbed the yoke as K. King lurched hard. An 88mm shell had grazed their wing. Sparks flew past the windows. Something inside cracked. Engine 3's on fire! Robbie shouted. We're losing fuel. Garrett's breath caught. Can we keep her level? Not long. Maybe 5 minutes. They weren't going to reach the drop zone. Not alive. But Garrett knew what mattered. Open the bay. Drop everything now. The plane buckled again. He didn't wait to see if the bombs fell right. They had one job: hit something. Disrupt something. Make it count. Bail if you can. Now. Do it! One by one, red lights blinked on. The crew ejected. The last thing Garrett saw through the cockpit glass was the burning wing folding into flame. He jumped. Wind screamed past his ears. The world was nothing but cold and black. His chute caught with a savage yank. He dangled, blind, spinning. Somewhere nearby, another chute opened. Robbie's, maybe? Below, a German countryside glittered with fire and flak. Garrett whispered to the dark, through bloodied lips and a taste of ash. If we make it, it has to mean something. And then the earth rushed up to meet him. The forest was breathing. Garrett Woods lay half-buried in a trench of damp leaves and twisted roots. The parachute hung like a ghost in the trees behind him, tangled and silent. Morning had begun, if you could call it that, a gray blur in the sky, thick with mist and the taste of something burnt. His uniform was soaked. Blood crusted one side of his face. His ankle, maybe not broken, but angry. It throbbed with every heartbeat. He didn't move for a long time. When he finally rolled over, it was with the kind of groan that came from somewhere deeper than the lungs. His hand found a crooked branch, bark slick with dew. He snapped it at the base, tested its weight, and hissed as he forced himself upright. No birds. No gunfire. No radio. Just wind. And then, an engine. Low, distant, somewhere to the left. Not British. Not now. Garrett pressed back into the undergrowth. He didn't breathe again until the sound faded. Even then, he waited longer. Robbie Hales had landed in mud. Proper, stinking, English-style mud, in the middle of Western Germany. His goggles were cracked down the center, and his ribs ached like hell, but his hands were fine. That was something. He patted down his jacket. No compass. No rations. No sidearm. Under an elm tree, he found a helmet. German. Beneath it, the remains of a skull, jawless and clean. Something about it made him pause. "Don't worry, mate," he muttered, brushing wet leaves off the old bones. "Not planning on keeping you company." They found each other close to dusk. Garrett limped toward a rustle in the mist, stick under his arm, shoulder against a tree every third step. He stopped when he heard the whisper of boots over leaves. Robbie emerged a few meters away, mud up to his knees, holding a jagged piece of metal like a club. They stared at each other for a second too long. Then, "Harry?" "Rob, bloody hell." No smiles. No hugs. Just breath. "Your leg?" Robbie asked. "Still attached." "You?" "I'm starving." Together, they retreated into a small hollow beneath a beech tree, the roots arching like fingers above their heads. Garrett collapsed onto the damp earth. It was the first time either of them exhaled like men who might live. "We're deep," Garrett said, pulling a crumpled scrap of map from his jacket. "Past Essen, I think. East of the Ruhr. And west of Hell," Robbie added. Garrett nodded. 300 kilometers, give or take. To Allied lines. Unless we want to walk through every minefield from here to the Channel, yeah? Long way home. Which is why, Garrett said, adjusting his position, we're not RAF. Not anymore. Robbie frowned. "Oh? We're civilians. Or Luftwaffe. Or lost students. You speak German?" "Only the important bits." "I'll do the talking then." Night crawled in fast. They covered themselves in moss and ferns, sharing a chocolate bar Garrett had somehow kept dry. The world beyond their roots was all mist and silence. Until a voice cracked the dark. Soft. Female. German. Another, male, rougher. Footsteps. A lantern cut through the fog in the trees. Close. Garrett froze. Robbie clutched his metal shard. Two figures passed not 10 feet from them, murmuring in German. Something about a barn. Something about hiding. Then they were gone. Garrett whispered, "Civilians?" "Maybe," Robbie answered. "But maybe not." They didn't sleep that night. Only dozed, eyes half-lidded, ears tuned to every branch snap, every breath of wind. The forest pressed in tighter with each hour. The ground might not have been as deadly as the sky, but it was slower. More patient. And that was somehow worse. But Garrett kept limping. Robbie kept watching. Neither spoke of the bomber, or the crew who hadn't jumped, or what waited if they were caught. But both had the same thought flickering behind their eyes. We didn't fall just to be forgotten. The forest no longer crackled with fire. Instead, it pulsed with damp silence, thick air, heavy with the breath of trees and war. A soft mist moved through the undergrowth like smoke without flame. Beneath one twisted beech, Captain Garrett Woods leaned against a root, his body folded into itself. His ankle throbbed, likely just a sprain, but sharp enough to steal sleep. The makeshift crutch he'd carved from a snapped branch lay beside him, its bark dark with his dried blood. Robbie sat nearby, resting against the trunk, hands tucked under his arms. The map he'd kept through the crash, creased, smeared with oil and dirt, was spread across his knee. It told them very little. Maybe a village to the east. Maybe just more trees. Neither had spoken in hours. There was nothing to say. Then light. A flicker, distant, golden. Too warm for a flare. Too low for a plane. They froze. Garrett raised his hand, signaling stillness. Robbie instinctively reached for the dull pocket knife tucked into his belt. The glow grew, bobbing. Footsteps now, 2 sets. Careful. Soft. Then a figure emerged from the mist. A woman. Wrapped in a thick coat, scarf tied tight around her face. She held a lantern with both hands. Behind her trailed a boy, maybe 10. Thin, wary, with a basket slung over one shoulder. She stopped, 5 meters away. Side Nick Vaughn here. You're not from here. Garrett answered calmly, softly, in practice German. We're sind Verletzt. Kein Soldaten. We're hurt. Not soldiers. The woman tilted her head. Her eyes scanned them, not with fear, but judgment. Measuring risk. Measuring intent. Ich weiß. I know. She motioned them forward. No questions. No names. Her name was Frau Else Waldman. Widow. Her husband had died in Stalingrad, a fact she mentioned once and never again. She lived on the edge of the forest, in a house that leaned like a tired man. The boy was Max, her nephew. His parents had been in Dusseldorf when the bombs fell. In silence, she led them down a narrow trail barely visible through the fog. The house was dark, shuttered. A single candle burned on the windowsill. She opened a hatch beneath the kitchen and gestured down. You'll stay here. 1 night. No more. You know why. The basement was cold and low-ceilinged. Earth floor. A small cot. A jug of water. A folded blanket. Max handed Garrett a slice of rye bread, then turned to Robbie. Chocolate? Chocolate? Without a word, Robbie dug into his jacket and offered a crumpled, half-melted bar. Max stared at it like treasure, then carefully broke it in half and handed it back. You need it too, he said in quiet, accented English. They lay in silence. You trust her? Robbie asked eventually. I trust her silence more than most men's promises, Garrett replied. He shifted on the cot, then added, I worked in Berlin before the war. British consulate. I know people like her. They don't forget what justice smells like. Even under ash. Outside, the forest hissed with wind. Somewhere distant, dogs barked. Then a car door. Then boots. Voices. A man's, loud and crude. Then hers, colder than the fog. You think he was a hero, and you hide rats in his place? Silence from her. Then, search. If you must. But find only firewood. Footsteps crossed the floor above. Garrett held his breath. Robbie's hand found his knife again. Then, retreat. The hatch creaked. Closed. They breathed again. Morning. Frau Waldman returned, bringing a small bundle of boiled potatoes and a tin cup of broth. Max followed, quiet, but this time his eyes were softer. My aunt says helping is not weakness, he said. Garrett nodded. And I say she's braver than most men I've known. Max grinned, just a little. Then he slipped a small object into Garrett's hand, a carved wooden button, shaped like a bird. For when you need to fly again, he whispered. They knew they'd have to move that night. The forest no longer hid them. The Wehrmacht would return. But as the lantern flickered in the corner, and the scent of real food filled the room, Garrett realized something. They weren't just running anymore. They were becoming something harder to kill than soldiers. They were survivors. And somewhere beyond the mist, that mattered. The floor creaked above them. Garrett lay flat on the cold dirt floor, eyes fixed on the low ceiling of warped, damp wood. His breath came slow and shallow. Every creak, every echo of leather on timber, felt like a nail tightening in his chest. Beside him, Robbie crouched behind an old potato sack, knife drawn, knuckles white with tension. The underfloor smelled of mold, rot, and burnt metal. It was barely tall enough to sit upright. Shadows danced on the beams above as someone moved inside the room, boots, heavy, official. Wehrmacht. Garrett closed his eyes and whispered to himself. Not now. Not like this. Upstairs, Frau Elsa's voice rang out, measured, low, but firm. I told you. I'm a widow. I live alone with the boy. I've nothing of value except the stove. If there's a crime in baking bread, arrest me now. A male voice answered, clipped and suspicious. Silesian accent. Precise. He mentioned something about light seen in the woods. Tracks near the fence. He was close now, so close the vibration of his boots made the floor shiver. Then, the boots paused. Right above Garrett's head. He froze. A sharp spike of pain lanced through his bad ankle. It took everything he had not to cry out. He bit down on his sleeve, face slick with cold sweat. Robbie didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stared at the sole of his boot, knife clenched, lips moving silently, prayer or curse, he didn't know which. Above, the man muttered something about rats. Frau Else replied calmly, There've always been mice down there. Try lifting the floor if you like. Just don't expect them to offer tea. A silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of laughter. Rough. Mocking. Rotten house, rotten woman. Enjoy your mice, Frau Waldman. The boots retreated. A door slammed. Only then did Robbie exhale. The hatch opened slowly. Pale morning light streamed through, cutting the gloom. Frau Else stared down at them. Her face was expressionless. You need to move, she said. By dusk. They emerged like ghosts, blinking into the gray light of her kitchen. Max sat at the table, a slice of black bread in his hand. He didn't look up. Garrett and Robbie sat by the stove. It wasn't lit. The cold was real. The kind that settled in the spine and didn't leave. Robbie finally spoke, voice low. You were too calm down there. Garrett looked straight ahead. I had a plan. If she gave us up, I'd say you were my prisoner. I'd tell them I was Luftwaffe. Shot down. Lost. Robbie blinked. You're insane. Garrett gave a half-smile. Maybe. But we're still breathing. Later that afternoon, they helped Max chop wood out back. Robbie showed him how to angle the blade to avoid splinters. Max said nothing but watched closely. Frau Else handed them a cloth-wrapped bundle, half a loaf, 3 boiled potatoes, and a small flask of water. As Garrett stepped to leave, she stopped him with a hand on his arm. You don't have English eyes, she whispered. And your voice, it reminded me of my husband. Before he forgot who he was. She looked toward the edge of the woods. West of here, beyond the last trees, there's an old railway spur. Not used since the last war. It's not patrolled. Follow it. But only in darkness. Garrett nodded. Why are you helping us? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They left at dusk. The stove still wasn't lit, but the warmth remained, in the bread, the silence, the glance Max gave as he handed Robbie a small wooden figurine, a rabbit, carefully carved. Garrett tucked it in his coat. He didn't ask questions. As they slipped back into the forest, Robbie muttered, I'd rather take a bullet than live another night like that. Garrett replied, Then don't get caught. The trees swallowed them again. But this time, they weren't just hiding. They were moving towards something. And that something, however uncertain, felt closer now than it ever had. The railway was more ghost than path. Overgrown brush reached out like fingers from both sides, clawing at their clothes as they walked. The rails, half buried under moss and cracked gravel, shimmered with dew beneath the moonless sky. Mist curled low around their ankles, thickening the silence with each cautious step. Garrett limped, his breathing shallow. Every few minutes he stopped to tighten the cloth brace he'd made around his thigh, the joint beneath it throbbing like it carried its own heartbeat. He didn't complain, he never did. But the wince in his jaw spoke volumes. Robbie glanced back often, checking on him without saying a word. The older man's silhouette was a ghost trailing behind, stooped, stubborn, resolute. They hadn't spoken for half an hour. Maybe longer. In this kind of dark, time was a thread soaked and stretched thin. The rusted tracks beneath them hummed with memory, not motion. No trains pass here anymore, not since before the war. That made it perfect. Abandoned lines were the arteries of the forgotten. And forgotten was exactly what they needed to be. Robbie's fingers gripped the compass around his neck. He didn't open it. The rail pointed the only direction that mattered now, forward. Then light. Two pale orbs shimmered through the fog ahead, slow and swaying. At first they were faint. Then stronger. Lanterns? No, headlamps? Garrett stopped dead. Robbie dropped to a crouch and pulled him into the shrubs off the track. The underbrush was cold, wet, and sharp against their faces. The lights crept closer. A low creaking followed, a wooden cart. Horse-drawn. Not military, then. Two figures sat atop it. One held a lantern, its glow flickering gold against the fog. The other rested something across his lap, a stick or a rifle. The cart came to a halt just ahead of them, on the track. Then, slowly, one figure climbed down. He was small, slender, almost frail. A teenager. His coat hung from his shoulders like it belonged to someone else. A patch on the sleeve, Hitlerjugend. But the way he walked, hesitant and glancing over his shoulder, was nothing like a soldier. The boy stepped toward the tracks. Garrett held his breath. Robbie's hand crept to his boot, where he kept a utility knife sheathed. The boy stopped, bent down, and laid something across the rail, white, folded. A sheet of paper. Then he turned and ran. No words. No salute. Just fear. Or purpose. Or both. The cart turned around. The lantern dimmed. The night swallowed it whole. Garrett crawled out, cringing with each shift of weight. He picked up the paper. The writing was uneven, hurried, but clear. Go to Steinfeld Station. Abandoned. Cross north. Farm. Say, I came for winter grain. A friend. Behind him, Robbie leaned close. Friend, huh? Could be a trap. Could be, Garrett whispered. But someone saw us. And they didn't point a gun. Robbie's eyes didn't leave the tree line. Could have been that kid from the village. Max? Maybe. Or maybe someone still remembers what it means to be human. The wind shifted. Fog rolled across the tracks in low waves. Their breath came visible in the cold. Garrett folded the note and slid it into his coat. We follow the track. But we stay sharp. If this is a noose, we'll feel the rope tightening. And if it's a hand? Robbie asked. Then we take it. Carefully. They rose together. Garrett leaned heavier on his stick. Robbie walked ahead, as always, eyes on the dark that came next. They didn't speak again for a long while. But something had changed. There was weight in Garrett's pocket, and it wasn't just paper. It was the idea that somewhere in this fractured country, someone had seen them. Not as uniforms. Not as enemies. But as men. And for the first time in days, Garrett let himself wonder if surviving this war wasn't just about hiding. It might also be about being found. The road was more a memory than a path, swallowed by dead grass and frost-stiff thorns. Garrett's boots sank with each step into the brittle silence, his makeshift cane pressing into the frozen mud with a tired rhythm. Behind him, Robbie walked with one hand on his belt, the other clenched around a jagged piece of rail he'd pocketed somewhere along the way. The paper still rested in Garrett's coat, the one dropped on the tracks, carrying not a name, not a plea, just that one sentence. I came for winter grain. The farm appeared as a shadow against the moonless sky. Stone walls, slanted roof, a silo leaning like an old man with one bad knee. No dogs barked. No lamps lit. Just a faint outline of life that refused to be erased. They slipped through a break in the fence. Dry wind brushed over the fields like a whisper too tired to speak. The silence wasn't peace, it was a hush, like a held breath waiting to be released. Garrett paused near the door. A lantern hung by a nail, unlit but still warm to the touch. He knocked once. The sound was small. Alive. The door creaked open. He didn't look surprised to see them. The man, tall, broad, maybe 70, wore a threadbare shirt and boots black with earth. His face was lined with more winters than wrinkles. He eyed them without fear, setting down the paring knife he'd been using on a bowl of potatoes. "What do you want, this time of night?" he asked in crisp, tired German. Garrett straightened his back and answered with the words that had brought them here. "I came for winter grain." A silence followed. Not dead air, something older. Then the man nodded slowly and pointed to a bench. "Sit. I'll make tea." They didn't ask questions. And he didn't offer names. In the faint warmth of the kitchen, they drank from mismatched cups. The tea was thin, but it tasted of roots and quiet generosity. On the table, bread crusts, dried meat, the humblest feast they'd ever been allowed. Robbie ate without speaking, chewing with the reverence of a man not sure when the next bite might come. The old man, Carl, they would learn later, never asked where they were from. Only looked at Garrett a long time and said, "Who walks this road doesn't come empty. And whoever speaks the password has survived something worse than war." Garrett didn't reply. He didn't need to. Later, Carl showed them to a barn behind the house. The floor was covered with straw. A rusted stove stood in one corner, its chimney long since collapsed, yet somehow, the room didn't feel cold. "Dogs don't bark at you," Carl said. "Means you're not here to take." He left them there, key still in the door. That key, it sat in the lock like a gesture of impossible trust. Not spoken, not earned, just offered. Inside, lying on the straw, Robbie finally broke the quiet. "You think he's ex-military?" Garrett turned his head, stared at the dark rafters. "No such thing as ex," he murmured. Robbie nodded slowly. "I thought this was gonna be a trap. Instead, I got tea." Garrett smiled faintly. "He didn't save us. He just did what we'd have done if the world had let us." They fell asleep with bellies warm and thoughts quieter than they'd been in weeks. And in Garrett's chest, something eased, not safety. Not yet. But that ancient tension, like a drawn bow, loosened just a notch. He thought of the phrase again, that strange sentence that had carried them across miles of danger. "I came for winter grain." No soldier would say it. No spy. Only someone who understood that grain wasn't food, it was memory. Stored hope. A thing you carried through the frost not just to live, but to believe. The snow was thin but treacherous, each step a memory etched into the earth. The footprints they left behind outside Carl's barn seemed to glow in the pre-dawn dark, a trail not only of their direction but their existence. Garrett Woods leaned heavily on a pine walking stick Carl had carved for him, each step jarring his bad leg, each breath catching with pain. Robbie walked beside him, eyes scanning the frozen field. Carl hadn't said goodbye. He had only pressed a strip of smoked meat into Robbie's hand, pointed northeast, and said, "Stay along the tree line. You'll find a rail station. Few guards. Fewer questions." Then, as they turned to go, he added in a whisper, "Don't look back. Someone always is." They didn't. But behind them, across the brittle horizon, a dog barked once. Then again. A sound like a gun cocked by the landscape itself. "They're tracking," Robbie said, almost too calm. "Either us or him." "We keep moving," Garrett said. His voice was flat, tight with pain. "If we die, it's not here." They crossed a stretch of broken fence, the ground dipping toward an old maintenance road that ran parallel to rusted rails. Robbie checked his compass, more out of habit than necessity. The rails pointed the way like black veins in white skin. They reached Falcon Station as morning stirred but had not yet woken. It was more a siding than a station, a forgotten strip of platform, a coal bunker, a sagging sign with faded black letters. The place smelled of oil and abandonment. A distant rumble. They ducked low. A train was coming. Cargo. Slow. No whistles. No passengers. This was a machine meant for moving things, not people. As it hissed into the siding, the two men crouched behind the coal stack. Garrett's breath came shallow, less from fear now, more from fatigue. His leg pulsed. He didn't complain. Robbie counted cars, 6 flatbeds, 4 boxcars, 2 tankers. One of the boxcars had its side cracked open just enough. "No," Robbie hissed. They sprinted. Or tried to. Garrett limped hard, nearly fell. Robbie caught his arm, and they scrambled up into the wagon of bundled cloth. They didn't speak for 10 minutes. Not until the train was well past the station. Then Garrett said, "If someone checks in here, we play dead," Robbie muttered. "Which, honestly, is pretty close to the truth right now." Garrett chuckled once, a dry sound. "I always hated trains." "Same," Robbie said. "Too many goodbyes." They lay buried beneath rough wool and musty cotton. Through a knothole in the boxcar, Garrett caught glimpses of the world sliding by, black trees against white fields, a frozen river, a church bell tower missing its bell, and a graveyard. British flags on 2 of the headstones. One crooked, half swallowed by snow. Robbie saw it too. "If I don't make it," he began. Garrett cut him off. "You will. I mean it. I mean it more. We're walking back through someone else's hell, Robbie. That counts for something." Then the train slowed. Too soon. Voices shouted. The sharp bark of a command. Something about Reinsdorf. Inspection. Robbie's eyes widened. Time to go. They didn't wait. They leapt from the moving train, Garrett twisting midair to avoid falling on his bad leg. He failed. Landed hard. Rolled. Robbie landed cleaner, but his shoulder snapped back with a pop. They dragged themselves into the brush, hearts hammering, lungs ripping cold air. No shouts. No shots. Not yet. Lying in the field, Garrett looked at Robbie and whispered, "We're still not leaving tracks." Robbie frowned. "What?" "No more snow under our feet. No more footprints to follow." And that, more than the train, more than the leap, felt like progress. They moved toward the tree line. The forest ahead was thick, dark, and unknowable. But it wasn't empty. Because now, with every step, it wasn't just about getting home. It was about walking a path so no one else would have to make it again. The forest beyond Reinsdorf was brittle with silence, as if the world itself was bracing for something it didn't want to hear. Garrett and Robbie moved in low, silent strides, staying close to the shadow of the tree line. The ground had turned firmer with frost, crunching beneath their boots. Robbie grimaced with every step. Garrett's limp had returned, aggravated by the jump from the train. They veered left, skirting around a hamlet they'd seen in the distance. 2 chimneys, a church steeple, and a patrol moving between barns like ghosts. No words passed between them. Words cost too much now. And then, the crack of a branch. Not under an animal's weight. A step. They froze. Out of the mist, a figure emerged. Tall. Hooded in a tattered oilcloth cloak, rifle slung but not raised. A man. His hands rose slowly, palms outward, as he stepped into the dimming light. "Ich bin alien." His voice was low. Rough. But not hostile. Robbie shifted beside Garrett, who stayed perfectly still, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" Garrett asked in German. The man lowered his hands. His eyes were gray, tired but clear. "My name is Eric Lothar," he said. "I'm not part of this war anymore." The rifle stayed down. Instead, Eric reached to his belt and pulled free a battered flask. He unscrewed it, took a quick sip, and extended it toward them. "It's warm," he said. "And it doesn't ask questions." Garrett took the flask, sniffed it. Strong plum alcohol, familiar in scent. He drank. The heat burned down his throat, seeping into his stomach like an ember. Then he handed it to Robbie, who coughed after the first gulp. "Not poison," Eric said with a faint smile. "Not today." They stood in a triangle of silent understanding. Strangers. Enemies, maybe. But none of them raised their voices. "I saw your footprints near the siding," Eric said, gesturing behind them. "You're heading toward the filtration zone?" Garrett nodded. "There's a way around it," Eric offered. "Old paths. Back trails. I can take you. But you'll have to trust me." Robbie leaned closer. We're walking blind, Harry. And this guy's holding a lantern. Garrett hesitated. The weight of every poor decision pressed against his spine. But something about Eric's face, its total absence of malice, tilted the balance. You go first, Garrett said. You lead. We follow. The forest narrowed. Eric moved ahead, steps careful, his rifle bobbing with each stride. He talked little. But when he did, it was without bitterness. He told them how he had been a sapper, building and breaking bridges. He described one night he wired a crossing with charges, only to blow it before orders came through, just to stop both sides from killing each other one more night. Then he walked away. I'm not a deserter, he said. Just a man who got tired of dying. When they reached a dry creek bed, Eric stopped. There's a bridge ahead. Old. Half collapsed. Beyond that, you're 2 valleys from the lines. The Americans took the ridge last week. They're slow to advance. But you'll be out of hunting grounds. He turned toward them and held out something small, a green flare. If you make it, fire this. I'll see it. From the hill. Garrett stared at the flare, then back at the man. Why are you helping us? Eric paused. Because if you didn't make it, I'd become a soldier again. He turned away without waiting for thanks. The bridge was as promised, crumbling but intact. As they crossed, the wind picked up. Robbie clutched the flask Eric had left behind, weighing it in his hand like something sacred. I didn't think I'd ever drink with a German and feel warmer for it, he said. Garrett didn't answer. But he looked over his shoulder, toward the shape disappearing into the trees. Then to the horizon, where something glimmered faintly between the bare branches. They slept that night in the ruins of a mill house. The walls were stone. The roof was gone. But there was enough shelter to keep the cold out, and enough silence to think. Not about the war. About the people they'd met who didn't want to be part of it. The flask passed between them. It had no name. But in the cold, it tasted like a home they hadn't reached yet. And when Robbie asked, You think we'll see him again? Garrett replied, If he's lucky, we won't have to. The ruins of the old Steinbach Bridge looked more like the bones of some dead machine than a path to freedom. Jagged stone ribs jutted over the river's edge, rusted iron beams drooped like broken limbs. The night air pressed heavy and cold, each breath scraping inside their lungs. For the first time in days, stars glittered unobscured above, clear, distant, and entirely out of reach. Garrett, Robbie, and Eric crouched behind the tree line overlooking the slope to the bridge. Beyond the far side, 2 figures paced under a sputtering lantern. No flags. No SS insignia. Likely Volkssturm, home militia. Volunteers or conscripts with barely any training, but tight nerves and twitchy fingers. Garrett observed them a long moment. They're watching the bridge, but not the ground. What's below? Eric gestured to the right, to a ravine masked by underbrush. There's a cellar beneath the roadbed. Used to store tools. If the structure hasn't collapsed, you can cross under. He looked at Garrett then, eyes narrowed. This is as far as I go. Garrett didn't argue. Just nodded. They moved quietly, Eric guiding them down a slope slick with moss and broken shale. The cellar mouth gaped like a wound in the earth. Inside, the air was sour and damp, thick with mold and rust. And then, sound. Robbie froze mid-step. You hear that? It was faint. A voice. No, not words. Whimpering. They turned a corner, Garrett drawing his knife without thinking. In the far end of the stone chamber was a barred alcove, some forgotten chamber sealed long ago. Behind the bars, in the dark, 2 figures. A woman and a teenage boy. Filthy, skin stretched tight over bone, eyes wide and sunken. They didn't speak. But they didn't have to. Their eyes pleaded. Garrett stepped forward. Who locked them in? Eric's voice was grim. Locals. Or patrols. Or both. Robbie whispered. We can't. You know that. If we stay. I know. Garrett turned to Eric. Can you come back? After? If they last the night, Eric said, not cruelly, just honestly. Garrett exhaled slowly, then reached into his jacket. He pressed his knife through the bars, then a folded piece of paper, a map, sketched from memory. He whispered in German, "Not yet. But soon. Hold on." The boy took both. Didn't thank him. Just held his gaze and nodded once, like a man far older than he should have been. They emerged from the cellar further down the bridge. The structure groaned under its own weight. Rain had begun, thin, steady, soaking. The stone was slick. Every step was a risk. Garrett moved slowly, gripping the railing when he could. Robbie stayed behind him, ready to catch him if he fell. Across the gap, the two guards stood in the wash of yellow lantern light. One smoked. The other argued into a radio, static and curses blending with the rain. Neither looked their way. They slipped past them like shadows. And then grass. Wet, soft, living grass. They had crossed. Garrett collapsed onto the bank, rolling onto his back. The sky above seemed unreal. Robbie fell beside him, laughing without sound, tears mixing with the rain. They lay there, saying nothing. Just breathing. Behind them, the bridge stood. And beyond that, everything they couldn't take with them. Later, in the trees, Garrett finally spoke. "We did it." Robbie nodded. "Yeah. But not all of us." They both turned back, toward the dark bulk of the bridge, the faint light of the lantern, still visible. Garrett reached into his coat, pulling out the flare Eric had given him. He lit it. Not green. Not yet. Just kept it ready. The forest finally broke. Just past dawn, under a sky the color of dull metal, Garrett Woods and Robert Hales stumbled out of the trees like ghosts walking on sore feet. Their boots had long since given up, strips of cloth wrapped around frostbitten toes, trousers soaked, faces gray from cold and distance. They were silent, heads low, until a sharp voice cut through the thin mist. "Halt! WWII?" A silhouette rose from behind a rusted sandbag wall. American helmet. M1 in hand. Garrett raised both arms, ignoring the screaming pain in his leg. His voice came dry, but clear. "Flight Officer Garrett Woods, Royal Air Force. This man, Sergeant Robert Hales, shot down over the Ruhr." He paused. "We're coming home." They were led into what had once been a train depot, now a makeshift Allied base, command post, triage station, and field kitchen all under one leaking roof. The walls reeked of diesel, antiseptic, and scorched coffee. Soldiers moved with purpose. The war hadn't ended here, it had simply hardened. Garrett collapsed onto a cot while a young medic began peeling away the crude bandages from his leg. Robbie found a corner and wrapped himself in a blanket someone had thrown at him. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he heard it, distant, staticky, but unmistakable, a British radio frequency. "Lancaster K. King presumed lost. 4 crew confirmed Kia. Woods and Hales missing in action." He stared into the void of the room, his jaw locked. Garrett, half awake, opened one eye and whispered, "Not missing anymore." But peace wouldn't come so easy. A man in a crisp American uniform stepped into their corner of the world. "Lieutenant Maxwell. Intelligence Division," he said without offering a hand. He eyed Garrett like a mathematician staring at an unsolved problem. "You speak German, Captain?" Garrett's answer was calm, practiced. "Yes." "Fluently?" "Well enough to ask for my life." Maxwell didn't smile. He dropped a manila file onto Garrett's lap. Inside, a photo. Black and white. A younger Garrett, clean-shaven, standing outside a Berlin cafe. 1937. "You were stationed there." "Diplomatic attaché. British consulate." Garrett didn't flinch. "Correct. There's a note in the file, possible sympathizer." "Care to explain?" Garrett leaned back. Pain flared up his leg, but he didn't wince. "I was there to listen, not to agree. I heard enough to know which side I wanted to live on." Maxwell studied him a moment longer. Then, Until we verify your identity, you stay here. No transport, no release. Robbie shot up from his cot. What? He carried me through half of Germany. He took shrapnel so I could make it across a river. Brave words, Maxwell replied. Words don't prove anything. Signals do. We're waiting for contact from your base. They waited. That night, under dim bulbs and threadbare blankets, Robbie asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell me you worked with diplomats?" Garrett exhaled slowly. "Because I didn't want to be just that. Not to you. Not out there." Robbie didn't answer immediately. Then, eyes still on the dark ceiling. "You weren't. You were the bastard who saved my life." They slept. Just before dawn, boots echoed down the corridor. A young American corporal stuck his head in. "Radio from Waddington. RAF confirms identity. Woods and Hales clear. Transport to the rear in 2 hours." Robbie smiled for the first time in days. Garrett's eyes closed slowly, his lips parting just slightly. They were alive. They were home. Or at least close enough to start believing in it again. The C-47 Dakota hummed low across the darkness like a mechanical prayer, steady and stubborn. Its fuselage, cold and metallic, carried with it a silence that felt earned. No bombs. No maps. No enemy fire. Only the rhythm of wings slicing through the night. Inside the rear hold, Garrett Wood sat against the wall, his legs stretched stiff beneath the blanket. Opposite him, Robbie Hales leaned his head back, eyes half closed, fingers locked around his dog tag. In his other hand, a photo, edges curled, creased from weeks of hiding. A girl, smiling awkwardly at the camera. "My sister," Robbie said quietly, not looking up. "Wrote to her every time." Garrett nodded, his eyes fixed on the round window above him. Beyond it, nothing but ink. But he knew what lay below. "That's home, Rob," he murmured. "Under that black." Robbie didn't answer, just tightened his grip around the tag. Words cost too much now. A soft crackle came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot. We're 20 minutes from RAF Linefort. Temperatures holding at 1 degree Celsius. There's coffee in the front, if anyone's still optimistic." Laughter rolled through the hold, short, tired, fragile. It wasn't joy. It was permission to believe they might actually survive long enough to want coffee again. Garrett leaned his head back against the metal wall, letting the motion of the plane cradle his bones. He thought of Els, her cracked hands and steady voice. Of Max, with chocolate on his breath. Of Carl, and the key he'd left in the door. Of Eric, with the flask and the bridge and the whispered regrets. Of the boy behind the bars, silent, wide-eyed. And then, always, the bridge. The rain. The weight in his chest as they crossed it. Had the boy ever made it out? Had anyone? He closed his eyes. Maybe someone had launched the green flare. Maybe not. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe survival was its own answer. Robbie's voice broke in, low and uncertain. "You think anyone's waiting for us?" Garrett smiled faintly. "I think we waited for each other. That's enough for me." They didn't speak after that. The hum of the aircraft said all that needed saying. Then, the shudder of descent. Flaps adjusting. Wind catching the hull like a breath held too long. The wheels kissed the runway, a soft, solid bump. The kind of landing you forget to thank someone for because your soul's too busy trying to catch up with your body. The engines slowed. The lights blinked. The back ramp groaned open, and with it came a rush of damp British air. Cold. Real. A dog barked. Someone chuckled. And then came the silence, a welcome one. A medic stepped forward from the line of waiting personnel. His coat was unbuttoned, his breath visible. "Welcome home, lads," he said, offering a hand to Robbie first, then Garrett. "We've missed you." They were taken to triage, rows of beds behind canvas dividers, the smell of disinfectant and tea heavy in the air. Garrett's leg was cleaned and redressed. Robbie refused a sedative. He just wanted a blanket and a window. That night, under a soft lamp, a nurse filled out her chart. Wood's stable. Sleeping. Hales, restless. Awake. Looking out. Neither has spoken of the journey. But both are breathing. For now, that will do. Garrett lay still in his cot. The pain in his leg dulled by medicine. The sound of rain tapping the tin roof above reminded him of the night they crossed the Rhine. Of the way silence sometimes said more than gunfire. He was back. Or at least his body was. And somewhere across the channel, behind the darkness and the bombs and the fire, a younger man had once taken off in a Lancaster with a crew he'd never see again. He wondered, not for the first time, if he'd ever truly landed. The spring mist settled over the coastal village like a breath finally released. Smoke curled from squat chimneys into the clean air above slate rooftops. It was April 1944. The war was still clawing across the continent, but here, by the sea, it waited quietly at the edge of things. Garrett Woods lived alone above a bookshop, 2 blocks from the harbor. The shopkeeper, a widow, barely spoke except to remind him when deliveries came late. It suited him. He needed few words now. His days were spent at a small wooden desk in the back of the parish office, translating military reports into civilian letters. He had a stack of templates, each one designed to say the unsayable with dignity. A name. A rank. A mission that did not return. Your son is presumed missing. Your husband did not return from his assignment. But to the end, he served with honor. Garrett copied the names carefully, checking the dates against the logbooks. Sometimes he paused too long over one. Sometimes he imagined their faces, or remembered them. The boy in the window. The mother in the field. The bridge. Each letter was his penance and his promise. Far to the north, Robbie Hales had returned to a small village near the moors. His sister, the one he'd ridden to in foxholes and forests, had greeted him at the train station with no words. Just arms. She hadn't let go for nearly an hour. Robbie didn't talk about the war. But each night before sleep, he placed his dog tag on the windowsill, like a compass pointing back through time. He didn't expect answers. Only silence he could sleep beside. Sometimes he wrote to Garrett. No greetings. No goodbyes. Just lines like, "You ever wonder if someone lit the green flare for us? Maybe we were the signal." The letters were rare. But enough. One afternoon, sorting mail in the office, Garrett found a letter in cream-colored paper, postmarked from the Ardennes. No return name. Only a line, scrawled in French, "Pour Monsieur Woods." He opened it slowly. "Monsieur Woods, you do not know me. But once you gave a knife to my brother. He did not survive. But I did, because of you. I am now a schoolteacher. And in my classroom, there is a map. Across it runs a single thread. It travels through forest, across rivers, through war. Underneath it reads, 'The path of the one who did not leave us. Merci.'" Garrett read the letter 3 times before folding it, placing it inside a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress, and sliding it into his desk drawer. That evening, he walked past the harbor, past the docked fishing boats, to a field on the edge of the sea. The grass swayed low and soft under his boots. The clouds above were thin and drifting. He paused. In his hand was a flare gun. Small. Black. Familiar. He looked up. No ceremony. No crowd. No speech. Just the breath of wind. And sky. He raised the flare, tilted it to the stars, and pulled the trigger. The green light hissed into the night, a quiet ribbon of memory arching high above the village, glowing briefly against the dusk. Then silence. No one saw. But somewhere, someone felt it. Back in the north, Robbie looked up from his windowsill, just for a moment. Down in France, a girl paused at her classroom window, fingers tracing the map. And in a quiet part of the world that had not yet healed, the last echoes of war trembled, and stilled. They were not heroes. They were simply the ones who walked far enough to leave a light behind,